The thing about space travel that nobody tells you is how goddamn boring it is. Sure, the first few weeks are thrilling. New stars to stare at, new vacuum-packed meals that taste like slightly flavored cardboard. But after that, it's just one long, cold, endless night with nothing but the same faces and recycled air. So when Leora stumbled across something actually interesting in the cargo bay of the Exemplar Ark, she knew she had to milk it for all it was worth. "Hey, Leora, what are you doing down there? Stealing more rations," came the grating voice of Terk, the resident malcontent and part-time engineer. He was perched on a stack of crates, looking like he'd just crawled out of a trash compactor, which was his usual state. "Oh, you know me," Leora shot back. "I just can't resist the allure of compressed protein bars. But seriously, Terk, come check this out." She waved him over to a dusty corner crammed with containers older than most of the crew. "If it's another dead rat, I'm not interested," he replied, but curiosity got the better of him. When he finally wandered over, Leora pointed to the hulking mass of metal with a grin. "Behold, the most exciting thing we've seen since that time the water recycler broke and we all got to play guess the mystery smell." Terk squinted at the artifact. "Looks like a big, ugly paperweight," he said. "Perfect for when you need to keep a stack of stars from blowing away." "Yeah, but this one's special," Leora insisted, tapping the artifact. It was cold to the touch with an undeniable hum that set her teeth on edge. "This thing's got a signal." "A signal?" Terk's eyebrows ventured closer to his hairline. "You're saying this hunk of junk is alive?" "Not alive, you dolt, but it's doing something." "Listen," Leora said, hitting a few buttons on her handheld scanner. A series of unintelligible clicks and whistles filled the air. Terk's eyes widened just a fraction. "Okay, maybe not just a paperweight." "See, I told you," Leora said, a smug smile flaring across her face. "Now, let's poke it until something cool happens." "Isn't that how most horror vids start?" Terk muttered, but he bent closer to get a better look. The artifact was about the size of a small shuttle, covered in alien script that looked like a drunk linguist's fever dream. Leora had no clue what any of it meant, but the constant rhythm of the noise was hypnotic. "Do you think the captain knows about this?" Terk asked, still entranced by the artifact. "If he does, he's not sharing. But since when do we let him ruin our fun?" Leora replied. "Besides, it's not like the guy who thinks a spreadsheet is an adventure is gonna care about this." "True enough," Terk conceded, and they both chuckled. Captain Yates was notorious for his lack of imagination, the kind of person who thought spicing things up meant adding an extra filter to the coffee machine. Suddenly, the artifact's sound shifted, a slight change in pitch that made both of them freeze. "Did that just?" Terk started. "Yeah, it did," Leora confirmed. "It's like it's listening or something." "Well, that's unsettling," Terk said, rubbing the back of his neck. "And by unsettling, I mean we're probably going to die. If we do, at least it'll be more exciting than our usual Tuesday," Leora quipped. "You're not wrong," Terk sighed. "So what now?" "Now," Leora said, her eyes gleaming with the kind of reckless curiosity that usually got people into trouble, "we see what else it can do. Maybe make some guesses, maybe press a few buttons." "Sounds extremely safe," Terk said with a shrug. "But hell, I'm in." As they fiddled with the artifact, adjusting scanners and pressing anything that looked remotely like an interface, a small crowd began to gather. Boredom was a powerful motivator, and news of an ancient alien whatever the hell this was traveled fast. "What's happening?" grunted Kess, the ship's medic and self-proclaimed realist, as she joined the circle. "We're just trying not to be the latest horror vid cliché," Leora replied. "Wanna help?" "Depends, is there a prize for the best scream?" Kess asked dryly. "Yeah, you get to live another day on this floating tin can," Terk said. "Try not to faint from excitement." As the signal grew stronger, the clicks and whistles began to form patterns, almost like language, but not one any human would understand. The air in the cargo bay was thick with tension, and a whiff of something that might have been a forgotten sandwich. "Maybe we should tell the captain after all," Kess suggested. "Just in case this thing decides to blow us all to bits." or turn us into alien smoothies, added Terk. Good thinking, Leora nodded. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we document it. Then we worry about becoming Space Jam. They spent the next few hours trying to decipher the artifact's secrets, failing spectacularly at every turn. But the thrill of the unknown was addictive, and for the first time in months the crew felt a spark of something other than mundane despair. Finally, when exhaustion began to set in, Leora called for a break. All right, let's pause before our brains start leaking out. Too late for Terk, Kess noted, nudging him. Ha, ha, Terk mock laughed. I'm a genius of incomprehensible magnitude, thank you very much. The group dispersed, grumbling about the lack of instant answers, but Leora remained behind, unable to tear herself away from the artifact's mystery. It was just her and the hum now, and an unshakable feeling that whatever they'd unearthed was just the beginning of something bigger, something that could change everything. And maybe, just maybe, give them a reason to keep drifting through the cold, dark void. As she turned to leave, the artifact gave one last, eerie pulse, the sound echoing through the bay like a promise or a threat. Leora paused, half expecting it to start belting out "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." "Well, aren't you a barrel of laughs?" she muttered, but there was no denying the thrill that coursed through her veins. The exemplar arc might have been a glorified tin coffin, but with this discovery, it suddenly felt a whole lot more exciting. As she finally walked away, Leora couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something enormous. She just hoped whatever came next wouldn't kill them all in the process. One could always dream, right? The exemplar arc had seen better days. Its vast solar farm, once the pride of the fleet, now stood like a behemoth of wasted potential. Panels stretched like tattered sails in a starry ocean, capturing energy from a sun that seemed as indifferent as the crew had become to their eternal drift. Most days, the ship was about as lively as a book club in a retirement home, but that was before the artifact. It had been about 3 hours since Leora and Terk had first poked the alien hunk of metal into life. 3 hours since they'd gone from contemplating the various ways one could die of boredom to contemplating the more immediate ways they might just die, period. The artifact, with its ominous hum and indecipherable chatter, had ignited a spark aboard the Ark, and not the good kind that kept the lights on. Terk popped into the control room like a man who just remembered he left the stove on. His hair was doing its best impression of a small explosion. "Leora, we might have a tiny problem," he said, which was Terk speak for "we're screwed." Leora didn't look up from the scanner she was fiddling with, trying to get some semblance of control over the cacophony of alien signals. Define tiny. Well, remember that faction of crazes who think we're about to be invaded by little green men? Terk asked, scratching the back of his neck as if trying to dislodge a troubling thought. Turns out they're not big on the subtle art of diplomacy, more about the shoot first, ask questions never lifestyle. Are you serious? Leora's head whipped up, her expression a cocktail of disbelief and irritation. About as serious as a heart attack in 0G, Terk replied with a grimace. A brief silence filled the room as the dire implication of Terk's news sank in. On a good day, the exemplar arc was a floating relic. On a bad day, it was a floating relic with delusions of grandeur that someone thought could double as a weapon. "So these idiots want to turn the ark into a superlaser?" Leora asked, incredulity lacing her voice. "What, are they gonna tape a magnifying glass to the front and hope for the best? More like they're aiming to turn us into a giant death ray," Terk clarified, his voice dry. "They think if they can reroute power from the solar farm, the ark becomes the universe's most overcomplicated, least feasible light show," Leora groaned. "Well, that's just great. We're stuck on a giant disco ball of doom." "Pretty much," Terk agreed, his sarcasm dialed up to 11. "And you know what's worse? They think that artifact might be the missing piece to make it work." Leora felt a chill that wasn't just from the recycled air. The artifact was humming away like it knew something they didn't, a secret that could spell the end for all of them. Of course it is, she said with a huff, because nothing says good idea like plugging an alien doohickey into an ancient spaceship and hoping for the best. Right. It's like they all skipped the safety briefing in favor of a crash course in lunacy, Terk remarked. And I do mean crash. A new voice broke into the conversation. It was Kess, the medic, who had a knack for popping up when things were at their bleakest. What's this I hear about us becoming a cosmic torch? She asked, her tone as dry as desert bones. Oh, you know, Leora said, same old, same old. Just a bunch of nutjobs trying to make us famous by turning us into the universe's biggest light show. Kess rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath that was probably not complimentary. Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit drinking, she said aloud. Or to start, whichever. Terk glanced at Leora, then back to Kess. So how do we stop it? He asked, sounding less hopeful than a man asking for a loan at a casino. Simple, Leora said, shrugging. We don't let them near the artifact. We find a way to keep this thing under wraps until we figure out what the hell it actually does. Good plan, Kess nodded, her voice oozing with sarcasm. And how do we stop them? Polite conversation. Maybe a strongly worded letter. Leora crossed her arms, determination written across her features. By being smarter than them, which, given their current strategy, is a pretty low bar. The trio moved like disenfranchised heroes in a bad action movie, each step heavy with the weight of impending doom. The Ark was a maze of corridors lined with panels and wires that whispered secrets to anyone who cared to listen. They made their way back to the cargo bay where the artifact still sat, humming its alien lullaby. You know, I bet this thing is sentient, Terk mused, tapping the artifact with a toe. Probably laughing its metal ass off at us right now. Let's just hope it's not the homicidal kind, Leora replied, her eyes glued to the scanner. As if on cue, the artifact emitted a louder series of clicks, the pitch rising like a warning siren. The trio exchanged looks, the kind that said, "We're in for it now." Okay, so, maybe it has a sense of humor after all, Kess remarked. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Let's just say I wouldn't invite it to poker night, Terk suggested, his voice laced with irony. The tension was almost a physical thing, crackling in the air around them. Whatever they'd unleashed seemed to be waking up, and Leora couldn't decide if that meant salvation or annihilation. Think we can use it against them? Kess asked, optimism creeping into her tone. Sure, Terk replied. If by use it you mean hope it doesn't obliterate us first. Leora thought about the faction, about the madness of their plan. Turning the Ark into a weapon was like trying to use a museum piece as a battering ram, only slightly less suicidal. Maybe, she said, her voice careful. If we can figure out how to communicate with it, we just need to keep them away long enough to figure out what we're dealing with. The air was getting colder, the ship's systems straining to cope under the pressure of their new reality. The cargo bay felt like a tomb, the kind of place where dreams and people went to die. Let's go, Leora decided, her voice firmer than she felt. We need to warn the crew, get them on our side. And if that doesn't work, Kess asked. We improvise, Terk answered, with the kind of grim humor that suggested he was half hoping for a firefight just to break the monotony. As they made their way through the Ark's corridors, the ship felt smaller, more fragile. A once mighty vessel, now reduced to a pawn in someone else's game. Leora's mind buzzed with possibilities, each more reckless than the last. When they reached the canteen, it was like stepping into a parallel universe. The usual suspects were gathered around tables, staring into their nutritionally balanced beige meals with the resigned air of death row inmates. Listen up, Leora called, her voice cutting through the monotony like a knife. We've got a situation. Heads turned, eyes searching hers for answers she didn't have. Great, more good news, grumbled a crew member from the back. There's a faction on board, Leora continued, and they want to use the Ark as a weapon. Murmurs, disbelief mingled with fear. Well, that's just peachy, said another voice, dripping with sarcasm. And here I was worried about running out of coffee. We need to keep them away from the artifact, Leora said, urgency in her tone. If they get their hands on it, they're gonna try and turn us into a cosmic candle. Why us? Someone else asked, the question more rhetorical than anything. Because we're on a vessel with delusions of grandeur and the intelligence of a doorstop, Terk retorted. And some folks are too stupid to know when to quit. What do we do? Asked a younger crew member, her voice quivering slightly. We stand together, Leora declared, the words hanging in the air like a promise. Or we risk going down in a blaze of idiocy. Your choice. Silence, thick as the recycled air. Then, one by one, the crew nodded, resignation giving way to a grudging sense of camaraderie. The Ark might have been a floating relic, but it was their floating relic. And they weren't about to let anyone turn it into a weapon, not if they had anything to say about it. As they prepared to face whatever came next, Leora couldn't shake the feeling that the artifact was watching, waiting. A silent witness to their struggle, and maybe, just maybe, the key to their survival. Because in the end, even in the cold heart of space, it was always better to stand and fight than to drift into oblivion. And with any luck, they might just live long enough to see what happened next. The exemplar Ark wasn't exactly a hub of activity, more like a retirement home for obsolete technology, but today the corridors buzzed with a paradoxical energy, a blend of fear and madness. It was just what you'd expect when the lunatics were not only running the asylum, but also giving the tours. Leora, Terk, and Kes found themselves back in the control room, a place that looked like it had been decorated by someone who thought beige was a lifestyle choice. The trio stood around the console, a relic from when touchscreens were a novelty, and Leora fiddled with the artifact's interface, the scanner bouncing readings around like a caffeinated flea. Remind me again why we're not just chucking this thing into space, Kes asked, arms crossed and skepticism practically dripping from her pores. Because, Terk replied, voice dripping with the kind of patience you have with a hyperactive toddler, we're trying to stop the crazes from turning us into a death ray. Remember? Ah, the good old death ray plan, Kes said. Right up there with creating a black hole in your backyard. Look, Leora cut in. If we're going to keep the Ark from becoming the universe's least efficient light show, I need to figure out what this artifact is actually doing. Good luck with that, Terk said. It's not like it came with an instruction manual. Leora gave him a look that could curdle milk. Thanks, Terk. Your support is overwhelming. The artifact continued its alien symphony, the clicks and hums rising and falling like some cosmic DJ remixing the sounds of doom. Leora's fingers moved over the scanner, each beat more irritating than the last. She tried button after button, looking for anything that might resemble a clue. Suddenly, a series of alien symbols blinked to life on the display. They swirled and danced, forming patterns that seemed to mock her with their incomprehensibility. Well, that's not helpful, she muttered, squinting at the screen as if determination alone could decode the gibberish. But then something clicked. Not literally, the literal clicks were still coming from the artifact, but in that annoying little brain of hers, a realization blossomed. Wait a second, she said, leaning closer. These symbols. I think they are coordinates. Coordinates to what? Terk asked, skepticism lining his words. Not sure, Leora admitted, but I think they point to something on the Ark itself. Great, Kes said, a treasure hunt with stakes higher than a space elevator. What's next? A scavenger hunt for the meaning of life. Ignoring her, Leora tapped a few more buttons on the scanner. The symbols shifted, rearranging themselves until they formed a map of the Ark. At least she thought it was a map. It could also have been a particularly abstract piece of art. Bingo, she said. I think it's trying to lead us somewhere like a trap, Terk suggested. Possibly, Leora conceded. But we don't have much choice. That was when the Ark played its trump card. A power surge that turned the lighting into a strobe show, bathing the control room in a series of epileptic flashes. Alarms blared like the Ark had suddenly developed a fear of the dark. What the hell? Kes shouted over the din, looking around as if expecting the walls to start closing in. Looks like our visitor here decided to redecorate, Terk said, pointing at the artifact, which was now glowing like a nightlight from hell. Damn it, Leora cursed, trying to slap the controls back into submission. These power surges are going to fry us if we don't do something. Any bright ideas? Kess asked, her voice a mix of exasperation and sarcasm. No pun intended. Follow the coordinates, Leora replied, forcing the words out through gritted teeth. It might lead us to a way to shut this thing off. Lead us to our doom, more like. Terk added, ever the ray of sunshine. But they moved because the only thing worse than charging headlong into potential disaster was standing still and letting disaster come to them. The map on the scanner led them through the Ark's corridors, down twisting passages and past rooms that looked like they hadn't seen life since the last century. The ship groaned around them, as if it were waking up from a very long nap with a hangover. Lights flickered, systems buzzed, and somewhere in the distance, something exploded with a sound suspiciously like a toaster giving up on life. Let's hope that wasn't important, Kess muttered, eyeing a ceiling panel that had started to smoke ominously. They arrived at their destination, a door marked with a symbol that matched the ones on the artifact. It was a heavy, imposing thing that seemed to dare them to open it. Well, this is cheery, Terk remarked, sarcasm seeping out of him like a leaky faucet. Leora approached, the scanner now vibrating in her hand like an overcaffeinated squirt. The door slid open with a groan, revealing a chamber that definitely wasn't on the tourist brochure. Inside was a console that hummed with the same energy as the artifact. It was covered in alien symbols, each one glowing with a sinister light. Looks like we found the brain, Kess said, the humor in her voice doing little to mask the tension. Great, Leora replied. Now we just have to figure out which wire to cut before the whole thing goes boom. Oh, is that all? Terk said, his words dripping with irony. Leora approached the console, her fingers hovering over the controls. The symbols pulsed, inviting her to make a choice she wasn't remotely prepared to make. Here goes nothing, she muttered, pressing a symbol at random. The console responded with a hum that rose in pitch, the room around them vibrating with energy. Leora could feel her heart in her throat, beating in time with the pulsing lights. The hum reached a crescendo, then abruptly stopped. The lights dimmed, the overwhelming buzz from the artifact quieting to a mere whisper. Well, that's a relief, Terk said, letting out a breath he'd clearly been holding. Don't celebrate yet, Kess cautioned. We still don't know what we did right, Leora agreed. For all we know, we just activated a self-destruct sequence. Fantastic, Terk said, voice flat. Just what I always wanted. Leora forced herself to focus, examining the console's readouts. A series of new symbols had appeared, this time accompanied by what looked like a timer counting down. Yeah, definitely looks like a countdown, she said, trying and failing to keep the panic out of her voice. How long do we have? Kess asked, not sounding particularly eager for the answer. Leora squinted at the display. 10 minutes, give or take how much? Terk asked, eyes wide. Enough to keep things interesting, Leora replied, sarcasm her only defense against the rising tide of anxiety. Okay, so we've got 10 minutes to stop the Ark from doing whatever it's about to do, Kess said. Any ideas? Maybe the answer's in these symbols, Leora suggested, though she couldn't hide her uncertainty. Symbols that we can't read, Terk pointed out, ever helpful. Then we improvise, Leora said, pressing another button with a resigned sort of determination. The console beeped in response, the timer's countdown slowing slightly. Looks like you did something right, Kess noted, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. Yeah, or I just slowed down our inevitable demise, Leora replied, not entirely joking. The minutes ticked by as Leora continued her trial-and-error approach to alien technology. Each button press felt like a gamble, the room's atmosphere thick with tension. Finally, something clicked, again, not literally, but in that brain of hers once more. A pattern emerged, the symbols rearranging themselves in a sequence that almost made sense. There, she said, pointing. I think that's it. It's a disarm code, are you sure? Terk asked, because of course he would. No, Leora replied, because of course she wasn't. Then what are you waiting for? Kess urged. Give it a shot. With a deep breath and a silent prayer to whatever gods might be listening, Leora entered the sequence. The console blinked, the timer pausing before resetting to 0. The hum of the artifact faded into silence, the lights returning to normal. The ship seemed to sigh with relief, the tension in the air dissipating like mist in the morning sun. "Well, I'll be damned," Terk said, sounding genuinely surprised. "You did it. For now," Leora said, cautious optimism tempered with her usual dose of realism. "We might have stopped the countdown, but we still have a bunch of lunatics to deal with, and a ship that's one bad decision away from turning into a firework," Kess added, ever the realist. "Yeah, but at least it's our firework," Leora replied with a smirk. They made their way back to the control room, feeling a little less like doomed rats in a maze and a little more like a crew. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, armed with nothing but determination and a well-stocked supply of sarcasm. As Leora took one last look at the artifact, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The universe was vast and indifferent, but maybe, just maybe, they had a fighting chance. The Exemplar Ark's control room could have doubled as a set for a retro movie about space travel, which was fitting because the crew's problem was as old as the stars themselves: people. A creature renowned for its ability to turn a simple disagreement into a full-blown crisis, especially when space is involved. The artifact lay dormant for now, but its silence was the kind that made Leora's skin itch. It was the calm before an inevitable storm, the kind that involved lots of yelling and possibly things being thrown. She turned to find the rest of the crew had assembled, like some dysfunctional family reunion, where everyone secretly hoped someone else would accidentally eject themselves into space. "So what's the verdict?" Leora asked, looking at Terk, who had the dubious honor of acting as the crew's unofficial spokesperson. His endorsement was worth about as much as a used air filter right now. "Well, some think you've saved our skins," Terk replied with his usual deadpan delivery. "Others are convinced you've doomed us." "Ah, democracy at its finest," Leora muttered. Kess leaned against the wall, arms crossed, scanning the room with that skeptical gaze of hers. "Anyone got a plan that doesn't involve flipping a coin and hoping for the best?" The lights flickered, a not-so-gentle reminder from the Ark that it was still on the verge of turning into a cosmic firecracker. The room buzzed with tension, the kind that came from knowing you were inches away from becoming a cautionary tale. "All right, let's do this logically," Leora suggested, though logic was often about as helpful as a guidebook in an asteroid field. "What do we know?" "That you're a threat," came a voice from the back, dripping with suspicion. Karim, one of the engineers, was always a beacon of negativity, and today he was shining bright. "Thanks, Karim," Leora replied dryly. "Your trust is overwhelming. Look, the artifact signals are getting stronger," Terk interrupted, pointing at the scanner that was now giving off more readings than a bored fortune teller. "And the Ark's drifting close to the edge of friendly space." "Friendly?" Kess snorted. "More like 'don't shoot us, we swear we're not alien' space." Leora glanced at the artifact, half expecting it to start singing show tunes. Instead, it just lay there, ominous and inscrutable. "This thing's connected to the Ark somehow. Maybe it's trying to communicate, or it's just broken," Karim suggested. "Like everything else on this rust bucket." Leora ignored him, focusing on the scanner. The symbols had changed yet again, now flashing in a dance that was less mystical revelation and more migraine in waiting. She squinted, trying to make sense of it. "Coordinates," Kess guessed, peering over Leora's shoulder. "No, more like warnings," Leora replied, frowning. "See these highlighted areas? They're danger zones. Seems the Ark's on a collision course." "Well, that's just fantastic," Terk commented, running a hand through his hair. "A floating relic with a death wish. To be fair, it's not like we gave it much of a reason to live," Kess said, gesturing around at the Ark's distinctly lifeless decor. "We need to move," Leora urged, "before this thing decides to take us on a one-way trip to oblivion. And how do we do that?" Karim interjected, all sarcasm and skepticism. "Sing it a lullaby," No, Leora shot back. We find where these signals are controlling the Ark from and shut them down. Assuming we get there before we all die horribly in a fiery explosion, Kess added helpfully. They set off down the corridor, the Ark groaning like an old man forced to get out of bed too early. The ship's lights flickered erratically, casting shadows that seemed to whisper promises of doom. Leora wondered if they'd ever get around to fixing the lighting, or if they'd just learn to embrace the whole haunted spaceship aesthetic. As they rounded a corner, the sound of alarms in the distance grew louder. Their footsteps echoed in the metal hallways, each step a reminder that time was slipping away faster than anyone could keep track of. "Does it ever bother you that we're always running towards danger?" Kess asked, breathless from the pace Leora had set. "Only when I stop to think about it," Leora replied, pushing forward. They reached another door, marked with symbols similar to the ones on the artifact. Leora approached, the scanner vibrating with intensity. The door slid open with a reluctant whine, revealing another chamber filled with consoles and strange machinery. "Welcome to the brain of the operation," Terk said, taking it all in with a raised eyebrow. Leora moved to the nearest console, fingers hovering over the alien symbols. "I'm guessing this is where the magic happens, or the disasters," Kess interjected. "Those seem to be more our style." Leora's fingers danced over the controls, each touch bringing a new flurry of lights and sounds. The system seemed to resist her attempts to make sense of it, like a stubborn mule refusing to budge. "Come on, you alien piece of junk," she muttered, trying another sequence. "Work with me here." The console beeped angrily, a sound that Leora instinctively knew meant try again, idiot. She gritted her teeth, feeling the weight of the crew's expectations pressing down on her shoulders. "You've got this," Terk said, though the look in his eyes was more "please don't kill us all than I believe in you." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Leora replied, refusing to let the pressure get to her. Finally, a sequence of symbols caught her eye, familiar patterns that seemed to promise a solution. She entered the code, holding her breath as the console processed the input. The room hummed with anticipation, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Then slowly the lights dimmed, the deafening alarms silencing one by one. "Did it work?" Kess asked, her voice a mixture of hope and disbelief. Leora checked the scanner, heart pounding in her chest. "Looks like it." "The Ark stabilizing." "Well, color me impressed," Terk said, letting out a breath he'd been holding. "Yeah, but we're not out of the woods yet," Leora reminded them, always the voice of realism in their little soap opera. As the Ark system slowly returned to normal, a calm settled over the crew, though it was the kind of calm that came after barely avoiding a catastrophic accident. Leora knew they'd bought themselves some time, but the artifact's mysteries were far from solved. "So, what now?" Karim asked, the usual bite in his tone slightly dulled by relief. "Now we figure out what else this thing is hiding," Leora replied, gesturing to the artifact. "Because I have a feeling it's not done with us yet, and if it decides to throw another tantrum," Terk asked, ever the optimist. "Then we do what we always do," Leora said with a wry grin. "We improvise and hope for the best." "Great," Kess said, sarcasm dripping from her words. "Our lives in the hands of an alien relic and a lot of wishful thinking." "Better than nothing," Terk pointed out, earning a bemused snort from Kess. As they began to make their way back to the control room, Leora couldn't help but feel a strange sense of camaraderie with her fellow crew members. They were a mismatched bunch, but they were her mismatched bunch. In the vast, uncaring void of space, that counted for something. The Ark was once again a relatively stable heap of metal drifting through the cosmos, but the artifact was still a ticking time bomb of potential chaos. And as much as Leora would have loved to toss it out the nearest airlock, she knew they were in too deep now. "So, what's the plan?" Kess asked as they reached the control room, the familiar hum of the ship's systems a comforting backdrop to their banter. "We keep working on the artifact," Leora replied. "Figure out what it's trying to tell us before it decides to blow us up again." "Sounds like a party," Terk said. "I'll bring the snacks." Just don't forget the sarcasm, Leora shot back. Wouldn't dream of it, Terk replied with a grin. As they settled back into their roles, Leora took a moment to appreciate the absurdity of their situation. They were just a group of humans trying to make sense of an ancient alien device, armed with little more than determination and a shared sense of humor. It wasn't the most reassuring of circumstances, but it was their reality. And as far as facing the unknown went, Leora figured they were doing all right. Sure, they were one bad decision away from a fiery demise, but they'd cross that bridge when they came to it, or more accurately, when they blew it up. For now, they were still alive, still fighting, and as far as Leora was concerned, that was a victory in itself. The exemplar ark continued its slow drift through space, a relic of a bygone era with about as much purpose as a defunct toaster. It was a wonder the thing hadn't just decided to give up and implode. The crew gathered in the control room, the dull beige decor doing nothing to mask the growing sense of dread. If they didn't solve this artifact's puzzle, imminent doom might be the best-case scenario. "All right, everyone," Terk said, leaning against a console that looked like it had witnessed the dawn of personal computing. "We've got enemy forces mobilizing. Apparently, someone's decided we're worth the effort to destroy." "Charming," Kess remarked, her arms crossed like a permanent feature. "Nothing says we care like a well-armed, welcoming committee. Can't blame them," Karim chimed in from his corner of negativity. "If I saw us floating around, I'd want to blow us up too." Leora was not in the mood for chatter. The artifact's signals had turned into a full-scale light show, the kind that could give a person epilepsy just by looking at it too long. Responsibility sat on her shoulders like a particularly annoying parrot. Figure this out or watch everyone turn into space debris. No pressure. "Okay, enough doom and gloom," she said, her voice carrying the weight of forced optimism. "We need to crack this artifact before we're vaporized. And if we don't," Kess asked, ever the realist. "Then we become space ash," Leora replied with a half-hearted shrug. "Just another day in paradise." The truth was, the thought of failure gnawed at her insides. She didn't sign up for this. Then again, did anyone really sign up to be the potential savior of a crew stuck on a glorified junk heap? Terk cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the matter at hand. "The artifact, suggestions," Leora sighed. "We know it's connected to the arc systems. Maybe it's trying to tell us how to not die. An alien, Simon says," Kess offered, raising an eyebrow. "Great. Just what we need. If it's anything like the rest of the ark, I'm sure the instructions are in hieroglyphics," Karim muttered. Ignoring him, Leora stepped closer to the console. The alien symbols flashed in patterns that seemed almost taunting. She ran a hand through her hair, a nervous habit that always left her looking like she'd been in a wind tunnel. "Look," she said, gesturing to the symbols. "They're repeating now. Maybe it's a cycle. Some kind of sequence we need to follow. Or it's just broken," Karim suggested again, because optimism was clearly his strong suit. Terk nudged Leora, a rare flicker of encouragement in his eyes. "You've got this. I mean, it's not like we're all depending on you or anything." "Thanks, Terk," Leora said, rolling her eyes. "Your motivational speeches are legendary." Dark humor was the only thing keeping her from spiraling into a panic. That, and the knowledge that if she failed, she wouldn't be alive long enough to feel embarrassed about it. "We're sitting ducks here," Kess pointed out, glancing at the arc sensors. "Those enemy ships are closing in, and I don't think they're coming over for tea. Why can't we have one day without existential threats?" Karim grumbled. "Is that too much to ask?" Leora's fingers hovered over the console, desperately trying to make sense of the symbols. They were like an alien Sudoku puzzle from hell, and she was running out of time to solve it. "Okay, think," she murmured to herself, though thinking was proving to be about as effective as yelling at a brick wall. The room was silent, save for the hum of the ship and the occasional sputter from the consoles. Tension knotted in Leora's stomach, each passing second, a reminder that failure wasn't just an option, it was a looming certainty. "Ever feel like the universe is just waiting for you to screw up?" she asked, more to herself than anyone else. All the time, Terk replied, his voice carrying the weight of shared misery. Leora let out a harsh breath, trying to focus. If this was some kind of test, she was failing spectacularly. And the stakes were a bit higher than flunking out of school, more like everyone she knew going up in a blaze of glory. "All right," she said, steeling herself. "Let's try this." Her fingers moved swiftly, inputting the sequence she hoped would save their skins. The console beeped, each sound like a judge's gavel passing sentence. The room held its collective breath, waiting for either salvation or disaster. The lights flickered, the ship's systems groaning in protest. For a moment, Leora was convinced she'd doomed them all. But then the artifact's signals changed, shifting to a steady, rhythmic pulse. It felt almost calm. "Did it work?" Kess asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Leora checked the scanner, her heart pounding. "The ARC systems are stabilizing, I think. I think we've got some breathing room." A cheer went up, more relief than celebration. Terk clapped Leora on the back, his rare smile a testament to their temporary reprieve. "Nice work," he said, genuine for once. "Don't thank me yet," Leora replied. "We've still got to deal with the welcoming party," Kess nodded. "Those ships aren't going to be happy we're still kicking." "Story of my life," Karim muttered. Leora glanced at the artifact, its mystery still far from solved. It felt like they were playing a game whose rules changed on a whim, and the stakes were higher than anyone was comfortable with. "We need to get out of here," she said, determination giving strength to her words. "Find somewhere those ships can't follow." "And how do we do that?" Terk asked, his tone more hopeful than skeptical. "The artifact might have more answers," Leora said, though she was as unsure as anyone else. "We just need to keep prodding it until something good happens. Or until it blows us to pieces," Kess added, ever the realist. "Then let's not give it the chance," Leora replied, setting her jaw with determination. "Keep an eye on those ships. I'll see what else I can dig up from this thing." As the crew dispersed, each to their own duties, the weight of responsibility settled back onto Leora's shoulders. It was a heavy burden, but one she was determined not to let crush her. The exemplar Ark, with all its flaws and quirks, was their home. And as much as she complained about its ancient tech and dubious decor choices, she wasn't ready to let it go down without a fight. "Ready to be a hero?" Terk asked, standing by her side. "Hero might be a stretch," Leora replied, a smile tugging at her lips despite everything. "But I can try to keep us alive." "That'll do," Terk said with a shrug. "Just don't make a habit of it," Leora chuckled, feeling some of the tension ease. They were far from out of the woods, but at least they had a fighting chance. And in the vast, indifferent expanse of space, that was all she could ask for. As she returned her attention to the artifact, trying to unravel its secrets, Leora felt a flicker of hope. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. She'd make it work or die trying. And knowing her luck, it might just be both. Asterisk, 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 somewhere beneath the layers of battered metal and obsolete wiring, the exemplar Ark hummed with a new energy. The artifact's signals pulsed steadily, almost like a heartbeat, guiding Leora's fingers as she continued to work. The enemy ships were closing in and the tension was palpable, but Leora refused to let the pressure break her. If this was humanity's darkest hour, she'd be damned if she went down without a fight. "What's the latest?" Terk asked, standing over Leora's shoulder. His presence was oddly comforting, like having a snarky big brother watching her back. "We've bought ourselves some time," Leora replied, not looking up from the console. "If I can just—" The ship shuddered, an uncomfortable reminder that their time was not limitless. Kess's voice crackled over the comms, her tone urgent. "Those ships are on the move," she reported. "I think they're gearing up to give us a real warm welcome." "Fantastic," Leora muttered, focusing back on the console. "No pressure or anything. Just another day in paradise," Terk said, echoing Leora's earlier words. Karim's voice joined the conversation, his usual pessimism firmly in place. "If this is paradise, I'd hate to see hell." Leora ignored them, her attention riveted to the console. The artifact's signals were changing again, the rhythm shifting to something new. She had no idea what it meant, but she could feel that it was important. Okay, she said, speaking more to herself than anyone else. Let's see what you're hiding. Her fingers flew across the console, inputting a new sequence based on the artifact's signals. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for either triumph or disaster. The arc shuddered again, but this time it felt different. The lights flickered in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate, as if the ship itself was trying to communicate. "What's happening?" Terk asked, his voice tinged with both fear and hope. Leora checked the readings, her heart pounding in her chest. I think the artifact's unlocking something. A new system, maybe." "You think or you know," Kess's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Let's go with think," Leora replied, trying to focus on the task at hand. "It's not like we've got a guidebook here." The ship's systems hummed with a new energy, the consoles lighting up with information that had been dormant for who knew how long. It felt like opening a time capsule, the past and present colliding in a chaotic mess. "Can we use it?" Terk asked, his voice laced with anticipation. Leora frowned, trying to make sense of the data flooding the consoles. "Maybe, if I can just figure out how to control it." The enemy ships were closing in and the clock was ticking. But if this new system could give them an edge, it might just be their ticket out of this mess. "All right," she said, steeling herself for what lay ahead. "Let's do this." The exemplar arc might have been a relic, but it was a relic with potential. And as Leora worked to unlock its secrets, she felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. As the ship shuddered again, Leora knew they were running out of time. But she'd fight to the bitter end, determined to give them all a fighting chance. Because in the vast, uncaring void of space, hope was a rare and precious thing. And right now, it was all they had. Leora stared at the console, her mind a tangled mess of frustration and desperation. It was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube in a dark, spinning room while someone shouted riddles at her. The room around her creaked and groaned as if the exemplar arc itself was sighing in exasperation. "All right, brain," she muttered. "Time to pull a rabbit out of your hat. Or, die in a spectacular fashion." Terk, leaning against the console with the casual air of someone who'd already accepted their doom, glanced over. "No pressure, just the usual life-or-death puzzle." "You're a real cheerleader, Terk," Leora shot back, eyes still scanning the symbols. "I feel inspired." A memory flickered in her mind, a childhood flashback of her father, an engineer with a knack for the unconventional. He'd always said, "Sometimes you gotta look at things upside down to see them right side up." It had seemed like cryptic nonsense at the time, the kind of thing a parent says to sound wise. But now, facing down an alien Sudoku that determined whether they all lived or became cosmic confetti, she thought it might be worth a try. "What if we've been looking at this all wrong?" she murmured, more to herself than the crew. Kess, standing nearby with arms crossed, shot her a look. "Well, if you're about to pull a miracle out of your ass, now's the time. Those ships aren't forming a welcoming committee, Leora flipped the console display, the symbols rotating in a dizzying dance. Everything was upside down now, but suddenly it made a kind of twisted sense, like reading a book in a mirror. "Oh, you sneaky bastard," Leora muttered at the artifact, her fingers flying over the keys. Terk peered over her shoulder, squinting at the reverse display. "Think you've cracked it?" "I think so," Leora replied, a rare flicker of optimism in her voice. "Unless I'm about to blow us all sky high, which, as plot twists go, wouldn't surprise me." "Go big or go home," Kess quipped. "Except, we don't have a home." "Yeah," Karim added, his voice as upbeat as a funeral dirge. "Just an ancient spaceship and angry neighbors with guns." The artifact's signals grew steady and calm, a soothing hum that felt like a lullaby for the damned. The arc's lights pulsed gently, almost as if it were alive and blinking in approval. A new set of data streamed across the console, incomprehensible at first, but then resolving into something that might just be useful. A defensive system, dormant and forgotten, now stirring like a long-lost guardian. Leora grinned, a feral smile that felt oddly liberating. "I think we've got a shield system, a big damn force field." Kess's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously?" "We had that all along," Apparently the ark's full of surprises, Leora said with a shrug, or death traps, the jury's still out. So we activate it and hope it doesn't fry us, Terk mused. That's a plan I can get behind. Leora nodded, hands moving with renewed purpose. Let's give our friends out there a surprise of their own. With a series of swift commands, the shield system roared to life, the ship vibrating with the sudden surge of power. The artifact glowed brighter, the signals syncing with the arc systems in a harmonious hum. Looks like we're not sitting ducks anymore, Leora said, barely keeping the triumph out of her voice. Karim crossed his arms, his expression a mask of skepticism. Great, we're mobile ducks, still ducks. Way to ruin the moment, Karim, Kess said, rolling her eyes. Now let's see if this thing actually works. On the ship's view screens, enemy vessels loomed closer, an ominous, silent threat. But as they powered up their weapons, a shimmering barrier enveloped the ark, an iridescent shield that flickered like the edge of a storm. Here goes nothing, Leora said, pressing the final command. Let's see if we survive round one. The enemy ships opened fire, a barrage of light and energy that collided with the shield. The impact was jarring, the ship shuddering under the assault, but the barrier held firm, absorbing the enemy's fury like a cosmic sponge. A wave of relief washed over the crew, a collective breath they hadn't realized they were holding. Leora let out a laugh, shaky but genuine, as the reality of their temporary reprieve sank in. See, we're not dead yet, she said, beaming at the others. Terk clapped her on the back, his grin wide. Nice work, Leora. Maybe we'll survive this after all. Yeah, Kess added, a smirk playing on her lips. And here I was ready to start writing my will. Karim shrugged, his gloom unperturbed. I still think we're toast. But maybe slightly less burnt. The crew's banter was interrupted by a sudden warning chime, the console lighting up with a new alert. Leora's heart sank as she read the display. Guys, we've got another problem, she said, gesturing to the screen. More enemy ships, larger and more heavily armed, were approaching fast. It seemed their little defensive trick had only bought them a temporary respite. Looks like they called for backup, Terk observed, his tone only mildly panicked. Why do things never get easier? Kess sighed, rubbing her temples. Just once I'd like a problem that can be solved with a cup of coffee and a nap. Because the universe hates us, Karim replied, as if stating a simple fact of life. Or at least it hates me. Leora scanned the console, her mind racing. They needed a new plan, and fast. The shield could only hold for so long, and with reinforcements on the way, their odds were shrinking by the second. All right, she said, determination hardening her voice. We need to figure out our next move. We can't stay here and hope they get bored. Terk nodded, his expression thoughtful. What else can the artifact do? Maybe it's got some other tricks up its sleeve. That's the thing, Leora admitted. I'm not sure. It's like a Swiss Army knife with no labels, and we're the ones stuck trying to open a can of beans with the screwdriver. Kess leaned over, studying the console. So we poke around and see what happens. Sounds like our usual plan. Pretty much, Leora agreed. We've got to keep trying. The Ark has more secrets, we're just not seeing them yet. Or it's all just a cruel joke, Karim said, his voice a monotone. Yeah, well, I'm not laughing, Leora retorted. So let's keep digging. With the crew's help, Leora dove back into the console, their fingers working with a feverish intensity. It was a desperate gamble, but when you're out of options, even the longest shot starts looking like a sure thing. As they worked, the Ark continued its subtle hum, a constant reminder of the stakes. Each passing moment was a countdown, the enemy ships closing in with a deadly patience. Okay, let's see what else this thing can do, Leora said, her voice strained but steady. The artifact responded to their efforts, its signals shifting once more. It was like an intricate dance, each step unlocking a new possibility. But whether it would lead to salvation or destruction was anyone's guess. Maybe we can use it to jump somewhere else, Terk suggested, squinting at the data. Get out of Dodge before they realize we're not as dead as they'd like. That's assuming the Ark can still jump, Kess pointed out. It's older than dirt and half as reliable. Hey, I resemble that remark, Terk quipped, flashing a cheeky grin. Focus, people, Leora interjected, though a part of her wanted to laugh at Terek's antics. The Ark's jump systems are still functional. They're just picky about when they work, Karim groaned. So we need to sweet-talk the ship into not exploding when we try to jump. Something like that, Leora said, her fingers dancing over the keys. Let's see if we can coax it into cooperating. The ship systems flickered, a telltale sign that the Ark was considering their request. Leora could almost hear the ancient vessel deliberating, like an old dog reluctant to fetch a stick. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," she muttered. "Do us a solid, would you?" The lights flickered again and the artifact's signals shifted. The data on the console rearranged, new possibilities blooming like flowers in a barren field. It was a long shot, but they were running out of time. And with the enemy ships massing for a final assault, they needed every advantage they could muster. Leora took a deep breath, her hands poised over the console. "Here goes nothing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The Ark systems hummed with renewed vigor, the energy coursing through the ship like a heartbeat. The engines rumbled, a deep, resonant growl that promised both hope and danger. "Okay, everyone," Leora called out, her voice rising above the noise. "Strap in. We're about to make our exit." Kes and Terk secured themselves, their expressions a mix of fear and anticipation. Karim, ever the pessimist, simply shook his head and muttered something about inevitable doom. The Ark shuddered as the jump systems activated, the ship trembling with the effort of tearing through the fabric of space. Leora held her breath, praying that the ancient vessel would hold together just a little longer. The view screens showed the enemy ships closing in, their weapons primed and ready. But as the Ark's engine surged, a blinding flash enveloped the ship, and they were gone. Leora let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her heart pounding in her chest. They'd made it for now, at least. The Ark had jumped, whisking them away from certain doom. But as the ship settled into the new location, the artifact still hummed with unanswered questions, the puzzle far from solved. Their reprieve was temporary, the enemy still lurking in the shadows. "Well, that was fun," Terk said, his voice a mix of relief and sarcasm. "Let's not do it again anytime soon." Leora laughed, though the sound held a hint of hysteria. "Agreed, but we're not out of the woods yet." "We'll figure it out," Kes said, her tone surprisingly confident. "We always do, or we don't," Karim added, ever the realist. Leora nodded, her eyes fixed on the console. They had a chance, however slim, and she was determined to make it count. The exemplar Ark might have been a relic, a floating museum piece with more quirks than a junkyard dog, but it was their home. And as long as she had breath in her lungs, Leora would fight to keep it from becoming their tomb. "Ready for round two?" Terk asked, standing by her side. "Not really," Leora replied, a smile tugging at her lips despite the circumstances. "But I'll give it a shot." "That's the spirit," Terk said, his grin infectious. As the crew settled into their new reality, Leora felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something to hold on to. Because in the void of space, where the darkness threatened to swallow them whole, hope was the only light they had. The exemplar Ark shuddered, a creaking wail of metal and regret as it hurtled through the void, making more noise than an asthmatic elephant in a library. Leora stared at the console in front of her, trying to decipher the artifact's mysterious signals. It was like reading hieroglyphics after a bottle of cheap moonshine, confusing, slightly nauseating, and likely to end in disaster. "All right, you beautiful piece of junk," she muttered under her breath, "show me your secrets." The artifact sat there, glowing in a way that suggested it was both mocking her and considering a career as a rave light. Its signals danced and shifted, taunting her with the promise of potential solutions wrapped in enigmatic techno-babble. "Think it's gonna start playing elevator music next?" Terk quipped, peering over her shoulder. "Because if it does, I'm out." Leora chuckled, despite the tension knotting her chest. "I'd settle for a user manual at this point. Or maybe just a big red fix-everything button." Wishful thinking, that, Karim chimed in, ever the fountain of optimism. "But by all means keep poking it like a particularly stubborn vending machine." Kes leaned back in her seat, arms folded. At this point, I'd take a kick to restart button. Ignoring the peanut gallery, Leora focused on the console. The signals were shifting again, like a language trying to translate itself on the fly. If only they could find the key, something to unlock the artifact's true potential. Without it, they were little more than a floating target. The Ark shuddered as a warning alarm blared, the sound like a cat being stepped on. Leora's heart thumped in time with the klaxon as she scanned the readouts. More friends joining the party out there, Terk said, his voice tinged with nervous excitement. Must have heard about our killer dance moves, Leora replied dryly. And by dance moves, I mean the part where they blow us to space dust. Fun times, Kess added, her voice a deadpan melody of sarcasm. The enemy ships closed in, a parade of bad decisions wrapped in shiny metal. The Ark's shields were still holding, but Leora knew they wouldn't last forever. And unless she could figure out what the artifact was whispering, they'd all be toast, and not the warm, buttery kind. All right, think, Leora muttered to herself, willing her brain to work faster. What are we missing? She traced the signals with her finger, squinting at the console as if that would help it divulge its secrets. It was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while blindfolded, underwater, and with a small but determined ferret chewing on your leg. Maybe we should ask it nicely, Terk suggested, a grin playing at his lips. You know, please and thank you. Or maybe we just need to piss it off enough that it decides to do something useful, Kess countered, a mischievous glint in her eye. Karim snorted. Great, so we're negotiating with a glorified lamp. Leora ignored them, her mind whirring as she made connections between the data points. The signals were like a song, each note leading to the next, building into something much larger. If only she could see the pattern. Wait, she said suddenly, her eyes narrowing. I think I've got it. This isn't just random noise, it's an instruction set. Oh, good. Instructions, Karim drawled. Maybe they'll tell us how to die slower. No, really, Leora insisted, excitement creeping into her voice. It's like a blueprint. We just have to follow the steps. Kess raised an eyebrow. And the steps are? Think of it like a dance, Leora explained, her fingers flying over the console. Each signal corresponds to a move. We just need to follow the rhythm, or we're about to tango with death, Terk quipped, but he was watching her with cautious hope. Leora concentrated, tracing the intricate patterns. The signals shifted, aligning themselves under her guidance, slowly revealing their secrets. It was like finding the key to a puzzle box, a satisfying click in the back of her mind. The Ark systems responded, the console lighting up with new possibilities. The ship Superlaser, a relic of a bygone era, suddenly activated, its power humming through the Ark like a live wire. Okay, Leora said, her voice barely above a whisper. Let's see what you can do. The Superlaser charged, a beam of raw energy sizzling through the void. It cut through the enemy fleet like a hot knife through butter, reducing ships to burning husks in a display of fire and fury. Well, that's one way to clear the dance floor, Terk said, his eyes wide with awe. Karim gave a low whistle. Didn't see that coming. Kess leaned forward, a wicked grin spreading across her face. Now that's what I call a game changer. Leora couldn't help but smile, though it was tinged with disbelief. The Ark had been hiding incredible power all along, power they now wielded like a sword against their foes. Guess humanity's not quite done yet, she said, her voice filled with the kind of determination that comes from staring death in the face and refusing to blink. The enemy ships reeled, their formation shattered by the unexpected counterattack. It was a reminder that humans were more than just survivors. They were scrappy, unpredictable, and willing to fight with everything they had. Let's keep it up, Leora urged, her hands a blur over the console. We can turn this around, Terk nodded, his grin infectious. Time to show them what we're made of. As the crew worked together, the Ark systems hummed with renewed purpose. They danced their fingers over the controls in a coordinated symphony, each move echoing the artifact's ancient song. The Superlaser blazed, a beacon of defiance in the darkness, cutting through the enemy ranks with precision and power. It was a testament to human ingenuity. taking something old and making it new again, turning the tide with creativity and grit. The exemplar arc was more than just a relic. It was a symbol of human tenacity, a floating testament to their refusal to go quietly into the void. As long as they had breath in their lungs and a fighting chance, they would keep pushing forward, one step at a time. "Looks like we're not toast after all," Terk said, his voice edged with triumph. "Not today," Leora agreed, her heart swelling with pride. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Karim shrugged, though there was a glint of something like hope in his eyes. "Well, if we're gonna go down, might as well go down swinging," Kess laughed, a sound full of life and determination. "Damn right. Let's give him hell." The arc thrummed with energy, each pulse a heartbeat of defiance. With every shot, every maneuver, they fought back against the darkness, refusing to be snuffed out. As the battle raged on, Leora felt a sense of unity with her crew, a bond forged in the fires of desperation and sharpened by the edge of survival. Together, they faced the void, determined to carve their own path through the stars. "Ready for the next move?" Terk asked, standing by her side, a steady presence amid the chaos. Leora nodded, her resolve unshakable. "Let's finish this." With a shared nod, they turned back to the console, their fingers dancing across the keys. The arc roared to life, its systems responding with a power they'd never dared to dream of. As the enemy ships closed in for one final assault, the exemplar arc stood firm, a beacon of resilience in the vast emptiness of space. They fought on, determined to carve their own path through the stars, and maybe, just maybe, change the course of history. Leora and her crew worked in harmony, each movement a step in the intricate dance of survival. They'd been pushed to the brink, tested by fire and fear, but they'd emerged stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever. Because in the end, it wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving, about showing the universe that humanity was here to stay, stubborn and irrepressible as ever. "Let's give him hell," Leora whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. And with that, they charged into the fray, ready to face whatever came next with grit, determination, and a healthy dose of defiance. Because that, after all, was the human way. The exemplar arc hummed along, the control room a tangle of wires and glowing screens flickering like discount Christmas lights. The adrenaline from their recent victory hung in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of burnt circuitry and the stale promise of recycled oxygen. Leora leaned back in her chair, letting out a long breath as the reality of their survival settled over her like an itchy blanket. "Well, that was something," she said, her voice laced with the tired kind of disbelief that comes from narrowly avoiding cosmic obliteration. Terk strolled over, his grin wide enough to slice a moon in half. "Something indeed. I was almost starting to miss the good old days of dodging bills and bad dates. At least those didn't come with lasers." Karim chuckled from his usual perch, his feet propped up on the console like he was lounging in the universe's most dangerous recliner. "Guess we showed them, huh?" "All it took was a bit of button mashing and a prayer. More like a miracle," Kess chimed in, her deadpan delivery cutting through the din like a scalpel. "Let's just hope Leora doesn't decide to try her hand at Galactic karaoke next." Leora shot her a look, though it was softened by the ghost of a smile. "Hey, I haven't sung since that one disastrous karaoke night on Gamma 12. I've learned my lesson." The crew shared a chuckle, the camaraderie forged in the fires of battle holding them together like old chewing gum stuck under a table. It was messy, it was sticky, but it worked. "So, what now?" Karim asked, tossing a glance at the console as if it might suddenly sprout a reset button for their lives. "Now," Leora replied, "we figure out how to keep this rust bucket from exploding long enough to get us somewhere that doesn't want to kill us." Terk snorted. "Yeah, because those places are just lining up to welcome us with open arms and complimentary fruit baskets." Kess shook her head, her expression one of resigned amusement. "I don't know about you, but I'd settle for a place that doesn't actively try to melt my face off. Let's start with getting the arc system stabilized." Leora said, her tone more focused now. "We've got a ship filled with ancient tech and no guarantee it won't go kaboom the minute we take our eyes off it." Karim nodded, his usual optimism tempered by the reality of their situation. "Sounds like a plan. Though if it does go kaboom, at least we'll have a front row seat to the best fireworks show in the galaxy." "One way to look at it," Leora replied, her fingers dancing over the console as she initiated a diagnostic scan. "But I'd rather not be the fireworks." As the crew set to work, the control room settled into a rhythm of beeps and clicks, the sounds of a ship that was, against all odds, still kicking. The exemplar arc might not be winning any beauty contests, but it was theirs, duct tape and all. "You know," Terk mused as he rerouted power from one failing system to another, "I think I'm actually gonna miss this old bird once we finally get off it." Kess shot him a sideways glance. "Miss what?" "The constant threat of death, the charming decor. The way it smells like something died in the vents." All right, Terk conceded with a grin. "Maybe not the smell, but the rest." "Yeah, I'll miss it." Leora shook her head, though a smile tugged at her lips. "You're all insane. You know that, right?" "Pot, meat kettle," Karim quipped, earning a snort from Leora. The Ayurs slipped by, the crew's banter serving as both a distraction and a balm for their frayed nerves. They worked together, patching systems and making jokes like it was just another day on the job, which in a way it was. As they toiled, the stars outside seemed to wheel in slow motion, a reminder of the vast emptiness that surrounded them. It was easy to feel small out here, dwarfed by the infinity of it all. But as Leora looked at her crew, her friends, she felt something like hope. "All right, diagnostics clear," she announced eventually, leaning back with a satisfied sigh. "We're stable. For now, anyway." Kess stretched, her joints popping like firecrackers. "Good. Because I was almost starting to think I'd forgotten how to sleep." Terk laughed. "Sleeping? What's that? I thought we lived on caffeine and the will to not die." "Close enough," Karim said, a lazy grin spreading across his face. Leora allowed herself a moment to breathe, to let the sense of accomplishment settle over her. They'd done it. They'd survived. And more than that, they'd managed to turn a piece of junk into a weapon of hope. "Well, folks," she said, looking around at the faces that had become as familiar to her as her own, "we did it. We're still here. And we're not toast," Terk added helpfully. "Exactly," Leora agreed, her smile faint but genuine. "Not today." They sat together, letting the silence stretch between them like a warm blanket in the coldness of space. It was a moment of peace, of quiet camaraderie, the kind that only came from facing death and surviving to tell the tale. "So, what do we do now?" Karim asked eventually, his tone as casual as if he were asking about dinner plans. Leora considered the question, her gaze drifting to the view screen and the endless possibilities beyond. "We keep moving. We find a place to get repairs, maybe pick up a few spare parts. And then, who knows?" Terk leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Think we'll ever find a place where we can just, stay?" "Maybe," Leora replied, her voice quiet. "But I think for now we keep going. There's a whole universe out there, and I'd like to see as much of it as I can before I kick the bucket." Kess nodded, a flicker of something like agreement in her eyes. "Yeah. Besides, I heard there's a planet out there somewhere that has oceans made of whiskey." Karim perked up at that. "Now that's a destination I can get behind." Leora laughed, the sound echoing through the control room like a bell. "All right, then. Let's set a course for the whiskey planet." With their destination, real or imagined, set, the crew settled back into the comfortable chaos of life aboard the exemplar arc. They might not know what awaited them out there in the vastness of space, but that was half the adventure. As they continued their cosmic journey, Leora couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the ragtag crew she'd found herself with. They were a motley bunch, but they were her motley bunch, and that made all the difference. Together, they faced the unknown with a determination that burned brighter than any star. Because at the end of the day, they were human, and that meant they were stubborn, irreverent, and hell-bent on carving their own path through the galaxy. "All right, people," Leora said, her voice carrying an undercurrent of excitement. "Let's see what other trouble we can get into." Terk smirked, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Lead the way, fearless leader, Kess snorted, her expression one of amused disbelief. Fearless my ass, more like reckless, Karim just grinned, the picture of optimism even in the face of overwhelming odds. Hey, sometimes reckless is exactly what you need. With that, they set their sights on the stars, ready to face whatever challenges came their way with humor, determination, and a fair amount of sarcasm. Because that, after all, was the human way. And no matter where the universe took them, Leora knew they'd face it together, with a smile and a quip on their lips. The exemplar ark cruised into the unknown, a battered but unbroken testament to the resilience of its crew. They'd been through hell and back, but they were still here, still fighting, still dreaming of a better tomorrow. And as long as they had each other, they could face anything. Onward and upward, Leora said, her voice carrying the weight of the past and the promise of the future. Onward and upward, the crew echoed, their voices a chorus of defiance against the vastness of space. And with that, they continued their journey, ready to face whatever lay ahead with grit, determination, and a healthy dose of irreverence. Because that was the human way, to push forward to survive, and to never, ever give up.